My parents generously offered my sister Luna $900,000 for her wedding, which allowed her and her husband to purchase a stunning home in a prestigious area. I was genuinely happy for her, although I couldn't help but feel a bit overlooked, considering the differences in how we were treated growing up. Luna, the favored child, always received the latest gadgets and fashionable clothing, whereas I grew up with hand-me-downs and took part-time jobs from the age of 14 to buy the things I wanted. I learned early on to be independent and didn't expect much from my parents beyond the essentials. 4 years later, when my partner Elijah proposed, I was ecstatic. We envisioned a simple, yet elegant wedding that wouldn't drain our savings. Surprisingly, my parents stepped in and offered to pay for the entire event. It was unexpected, especially since they had never shown such financial generosity towards me. Their involvement and enthusiasm made me feel acknowledged for the first time. The wedding day itself was exactly what Elijah and I had hoped for, a modest, intimate gathering of loved ones. However, the warmth of that day soon cooled when, just 5 days later, my parents sent me an invoice for the entire cost of the wedding. Stunned and hurt, I decided to pay the invoice and subsequently cut off contact with them to heal from this betrayal. Meanwhile, my sister Luna, angered by my decision, showed up at my door, creating a scene. Despite the turmoil, the independence I cultivated from a young age fortified me through these challenging times, allowing me to move forward with my life alongside Elijah, free from the unequal expectations and disappointments of my past. During my wedding celebration, my parents participated actively, delivering heartfelt speeches and sharing dances that radiated pure joy. It was a rare moment when I felt completely acknowledged and valued by them, almost as if they were truly proud of me. My husband, Elijah, and I were looking forward to our honeymoon the next week, though we had to wrap up some work obligations first. However, just 2 days post-wedding, I was taken aback by an email from my father. Expecting perhaps a sweet note or a thoughtful wedding gift card, I instead found a cold, business-like message with an itemized invoice attached as a PDF. It detailed every expense they had incurred for the wedding, demanding prompt settlement. The total was precisely $57,100.66, down to the cost of the last appetizer and floral arrangement. I was shocked, feeling as if the wind had been knocked out of me. Elijah was furious when he saw the email. It wasn't the financial burden that upset us. We could manage the cost, but the principle. My parents had insisted on paying for the wedding, presenting it as a gift and actively involving themselves in the planning. Yet now, they were treating it as a transaction, reversing their initial gesture of goodwill. This felt like a stark contrast to how they treated my sister, Luna, at her wedding, where they generously gave her $900,000 with no strings attached. The disparity in treatment between Luna and me had always been a subtle undercurrent in our family dynamics, but this act felt like a direct confrontation. After a restless night, Elijah and I discussed our options and decided on a course of action. I chose to write a check for the full amount to clear the debt, but I also wrote them a letter. In it, I expressed my deep hurt and disappointment. I recounted my lifelong independence from the age of 14, struggling on my own while they lavished Luna with support. I explained how their offer to fund the wedding had initially seemed like a sign of equal love and appreciation, which made their subsequent demand for payment even more painful. In my letter, I was candid about the years of emotional neglect and favoritism I felt they had shown. This wedding invoice was the last straw, a cruel bait-and-switch that redefined our relationship. I stated clearly that this would be our final financial interaction. From then on, I would refuse any offers of help, support, or gifts from them, establishing a boundary to protect myself from further disappointment. This decision wasn't easy, but it was necessary to preserve my well-being and dignity in the face of what I perceived as manipulation disguised as generosity. I decided I didn't need anything from my parents anymore, not even the inheritance. I told them they could give everything to my sister Luna, like they usually did. I sent the check, bought a gift for my mom, and then blocked their numbers. I needed some space to breathe, and Elijah, my supportive partner, agreed with my decision. Initially, I felt a sense of relief after mailing everything off. However, their silence in the days following was deafening. I heard nothing from them, which just intensified my feelings of resentment. Then, suddenly, a flood of messages from distant relatives started. Aunts, uncles, and family friends bombarded me with calls and texts, accusing me of being ungrateful and overdramatic. They claimed my parents had always looked out for me and that I was exaggerating the situation. Luna was no different. She called, accusing me of tearing the family apart. She argued that I should have paid the invoice quietly. It was typical of her to side with them. And why wouldn't she? I haven't replied to any of them because I'm at a loss for words. On one hand, I feel my actions were justified. After being treated as the lesser priority for so long, I saw this as the breaking point and a chance to stand up for myself. But on the other hand, I wonder if I'm being too sensitive. Was it unreasonable to expect them to treat my wedding as they had treated Luna's, like a gift? Perhaps I should have just dealt with the invoice quietly and moved on. Elijah's family has been incredibly supportive through this ordeal. His parents were appalled to hear how my family had treated me and have checked in on us daily. Yet, the continuous disapproval from my own family is taking its toll. I'm starting to doubt whether I made the right choice. Should I have attempted to discuss things with my parents before cutting ties? Or was I right to set boundaries after feeling undervalued for so long? Now, I'm truly at a crossroads, unsure if I'm the one at fault. Part of me feels I had every right to be upset and stand up for myself. Yet, another part wonders if I've just caused an irreparable rift in my family. Maybe I should reconsider my approach, but I'm still figuring out the best way forward. In hindsight, I realize I could have approached the situation differently. Since my last update, things have only gotten worse. I never imagined that sending a check and a letter would unleash such consequences, but here we are. Yesterday, I received an unexpected email from my mother, which I hadn't blocked because it came from her work address. The email was lengthy and preachy, revealing that the invoice they had sent was not meant to be taken seriously. She claimed that they never intended to cash the check. According to her, the whole scenario was a test of my financial responsibility, a life lesson they concocted to see how I would react. Once they felt I had learned my lesson, they planned to destroy the check and surprise me with a $300,000 wedding gift. I was dumbfounded by what I read. A life lesson? How could my parents play such a deceptive game with their adult daughter? It became glaringly apparent that their actions were not about love or fairness, but about exerting control. They wanted to see whether I would submit or stand up for myself. It felt manipulative and harsh. Without second thoughts, I deposited the check through mobile banking, determined not to let them just tear it up. After learning their true intentions, I wanted the check processed, and I wanted them to face the consequences of their scheme. In response to my mother's email, I sent a brief and straightforward reply. Thank you for clarifying that this was a calculated test and not a misunderstanding. After sending that, I blocked her work email as well. I anticipated further attempts to reach me, but I had no interest in engaging in any more of their games or so-called lessons. The situation escalated later that evening when Luna, my sister, unexpectedly showed up at my apartment. She banged on my door and called out loudly. Initially, I didn't respond, hoping she would leave. However, she persisted, eventually shouting through the door, accusing me of being childish and blowing the situation out of proportion. She argued that our parents were trying to teach me something valuable, but I couldn't see any merit in their methods. My parents had always been concerned about my spending habits, and in an effort to teach me responsibility, they made some decisions that didn't sit well with me. When Luna, of all people, criticized me for my reaction to their methods, I was infuriated. Despite never having paid her own phone bill or worked without our parents' financial support, she had the nerve to preach to me about financial prudence. As she continued to scold me, I quietly began to record our conversation on my phone, unsure of what might happen next, but wanting to have evidence in case things escalated further. Luna claimed that I was causing a rift in the family over something minor and insisted that I should apologize to our parents and move past it. She maintained that they had always tried their best for us and that the entire situation was my fault for overreacting. I chose not to reply, or even open the door, but simply sat there, listening and seething in silence. After what seemed like forever, she stormed off, but not without labeling me selfish and accusing me of trying to sever family ties over financial issues. Once she left, the silence weighed heavily on me. Luna's outburst only deepened my conviction that she would always side with them, regardless of how unfair or painful their actions might be. That evening, my phone was bombarded with messages from extended family members. It appeared that Luna had spoken to my parents immediately after leaving and had mobilized them against me. I received texts from aunts, uncles, and even some family friends, all echoing the same sentiments. I was ungrateful, I was stirring up needless trouble, and I needed to apologize for my behavior. One message, from an aunt I hadn't communicated with in years, stood out. She told me I was fortunate to have parents who cared enough to teach me these lessons, and that I should be thankful. I was taken aback by how quickly everyone sided against me, assuming my parents were correct simply because they held financial power. It seemed as though no one took into account the emotional manipulation or the long-standing favoritism I endured. Instead, all that mattered to them was that I appeared to be rejecting what they saw as my parents' generous offer. This reaction deeply troubled Elijah. He could see the toll it was taking on me. He frequently suggested that I might want to step away from social media and shut off my phone for a while to find some tranquility. Elijah also reminded me of the countless times my parents had shown a clear preference for my sister, Luna, and how they often used their wealth to wield control over us. The most exasperating part was the lack of clarity. My parents didn't reach out to clarify their stance. They seemed content with their version of events, casting themselves as misunderstood benefactors and me as the unappreciative daughter who had exaggerated the whole situation. I began to question my approach. Perhaps I shouldn't have sent that confrontational letter or blocked them. Maybe a face-to-face conversation would have been more productive, though experience reminded me how those discussions typically unfolded. My feelings would get twisted around, and I'd end up apologizing for feeling wounded. It was a draining cycle I had been trapped in for years, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to endure it again. For now, my focus is on the life Elijah and I are trying to build together. We're holding on to hope and looking forward to better days. I want to thank everyone who reached out with comments, advice, and personal stories. Your support has truly been a beacon during this challenging time. Over the past few days, I've been caught in a storm of emotions, and your support has been incredibly valuable to me. Despite my efforts to remain resilient, recent events have taken yet another surprising twist. A few days following Luna's visit, I received a phone call from my uncle, my father's brother, whom I hadn't spoken to in many years. Given our lack of closeness and the recent pressures from other family members to reconcile with my parents, I braced myself for a similar message from him. However, what he revealed instead was utterly shocking and reshaped my understanding of the situation. He began by explaining that he had learned about my circumstances through family gossip and felt compelled to contact me. Surprisingly, this wasn't the first time my parents had engaged in such disruptive behavior. He recounted a similar incident from 17 years ago involving himself and my grandparents, my father's parents. Back then, when he resisted their controlling and manipulative tactics, they tarnished his reputation within the family, falsely accusing him of theft and ingratitude. During that time, my father didn't support him. Instead, he sided with the grandparents, causing a deep and lasting rift between the brothers. My uncle shared that he felt abandoned by my father and that it had taken him years to understand and accept the dysfunctional dynamics within our family. His stories mirrored my own experiences, illustrating how my grandparents had used financial leverage and manipulation to dominate him, just as my parents were attempting with me. The more my uncle spoke, the clearer it became. My parents' actions weren't isolated or unusual, but part of a long-standing family pattern of behavior. This cycle of manipulation had originated with their parents, and my father, once a participant in his brother's ordeal, was now perpetuating the same role against me. This revelation didn't just change my view of the current predicament. It illuminated the generational shadows that had long influenced our family dynamics. My uncle once shared a personal story that deeply resonated with me. He had chosen not to adhere to the strict expectations of my grandparents, a decision that led to severe repercussions. Following their disagreement, my grandparents completely ostracized him, severing both emotional and financial ties. They even went so far as to tarnish his reputation within the family, labeling him as the outcast, and many relatives still hold onto those fabricated stories. According to him, their actions were a means of exerting control. When they realized they could no longer influence his decisions, they chose to erase him from their lives entirely. Hearing his account was unsettling, as it mirrored my current predicament. Recently, I had opted not to conform to my parents' manipulative strategies, which upset them greatly. Instead of seeking to understand my point of view, they turned the family against me. This ordeal illuminated the pervasive and toxic cycle within our family dynamics, deeply rooted in control and manipulation. During my discussion with my uncle, I was left to ponder the entirety of his experiences and their implications. It occurred to me that perhaps my father's stern behavior might be fueled by guilt, suspecting that he had unjustly abandoned his own brother. Perhaps he was now overcompensating by reinforcing those same manipulative tactics. This revelation made me realize that my relationship with my parents and my sister Luna had always been predicated on an obligation they felt we owed them. Any deviation from this prescribed role was viewed as an act of betrayal. The more I reflected on these insights, the more evident it became that the issue was not about me, but rather about them, their unresolved conflicts and the unhealthy patterns they had inherited from their parents. In the ensuing days, the family dynamics intensified, with Luna particularly active in rallying relatives against me. Even a cousin I was close to accused me of being selfish and disrespectful, urging me to apologize and humble myself. This entire experience forced me to confront the deep-seated issues within my family, recognizing the need for change and understanding beyond just adhering to imposed expectations. It had become overwhelmingly clear that the message I received was steeped in the same tired cliches everyone else had been echoing. Reading it was a chore. Growing up, love in my family always came with conditions, whether it involved financial assistance, emotional backing, or even celebrating milestones like a wedding. After I decided to break away from their expectations, I found myself being ostracized and isolated, much like my uncle had experienced. Throughout this ordeal, Elijah has been an unwavering source of strength. Following a revealing conversation with my uncle, Elijah and I had a heartfelt discussion about our future. He reassured me that together, we could face anything and reminded me that I was beholden to no one, not to my parents, not to Luna, and certainly not to distant relatives who had taken it upon themselves to judge my life choices. His support has been a pillar of strength, and I am immensely thankful for it. Yet, even with Elijah's support, I find myself grappling with mixed emotions. The psychological toll from my parents' conditional love was significant, and part of me questioned whether I was at fault. I pondered endlessly about possible ways to mend things without compromising my own principles. Could there be a way to reconcile without sacrificing my mental well-being? Amidst this turmoil, I received a voicemail from my father, his first attempt to reach out since the fallout. His tone was weary, not confrontational as I had braced for. He expressed a desire to end the conflict and was ready to talk, should I be willing. There was no apology or recognition of past wrongs, yet his message hinted at a change in his stance, perhaps an acknowledgement that I wouldn't yield as easily this time. I'm hesitant to respond. Part of me yearns to re-engage and explore whether a genuine dialogue is possible. Yet another part suspects this could be another manipulative tactic designed to induce guilt. My uncle's cautionary words echo in my mind. They might never acknowledge their wrongdoing. The path forward remains uncertain as I weigh the potential for an honest reconciliation against the risk of further emotional manipulation. It seems I was mistaken in my previous belief that things could be resolved simply because they should be. If I do choose to speak with my father, I must brace myself for the possibility that nothing may change. At the moment, I'm still sorting through everything: the startling revelations from my uncle, the myriad messages from relatives, and the voicemail from my father. It's all swirling in my thoughts, leaving me uncertain of my next steps. I'd like to think that my parents are capable of change, that they might start to view me as an equal rather than someone to be controlled. Yet, I'm acutely aware that years of such treatment won't be undone with just one conversation. For now, I'm taking life one day at a time. Elijah and I are concentrating on building our own lives, striving for a future that's healthy and devoid of the toxic patterns we've known in our families. However, I still grapple with doubts. Am I correct in standing firm, or am I alienating the only family I've known? As much as I wish for a definitive answer, I find myself in the same uncertainty. But perhaps that's all right. I'll continue to keep you updated as things evolve, but for now, I'm doing my best to navigate through this complex situation. Update. Hello, everyone. I want to express my immense gratitude for your responses. Your advice and support have been crucial as I tackle this family crisis. When I initially posted, I was unsure of my direction or desires, but your feedback has prompted several significant insights. Many of you highlighted how I've been trying to mend things with my parents, aiming to smooth over issues and maintain a facade of normalcy. I've come to accept that returning to normal, whatever that may have been, is not necessary or even healthy. The relationship with my parents has always been strained, and for years I chose to overlook this fact. Now, I acknowledge that it's acceptable to release any expectation that things will return to how I once hoped. Some of you also suggested that perhaps I've been overly generous in assuming my father's innocence. Reflecting on this, I see clearer the patterns and dynamics that have shaped our interactions. For a long time, I clung to the hope that perhaps my father's behavior was fueled by guilt and that he might change. I thought his actions could be excused by this guilt, but I was mistaken. His years of manipulation, favoritism, and emotional control were unjustifiable. No amount of guilt on his part could nullify the hurt he caused. It doesn't mean I have to forgive him without question, but I realized that for my own peace, I needed closure. I had to close this painful chapter of my life, regardless of whether it included reconciling with my parents. With this in mind, I decided to confront my father, a step I felt necessary for my own healing, not for their sake. When we met, the man who once filled me with fear seemed diminished, almost defeated. For the first time, he appeared genuinely remorseful. He didn't explicitly say, "I'm sorry," but he expressed regret about the mishaps during the wedding and acknowledged the unfair treatment from my mother and sister, Luna. He even took steps to ease my discomfort by asking relatives to give me space. Unexpectedly, he attempted to return the money I had sent to cover wedding expenses. He slid the check across the table, explaining that he and my mother wanted to make amends. However, I was ready for this. I firmly refused to take the money back, explaining that our issues weren't just about money. They were about a lifetime of being made to feel inferior and the emotional strain it caused. I made it clear that returning the money couldn't undo the years of neglect and emotional turmoil. When I refused the money, I saw frustration in his eyes, as if he was at a loss for how else to express his regret. Perhaps, to him, offering the money was a symbol of his apology, but it failed to address the deeper, long-standing issues. After I insisted that I wouldn't take the money, he sat in silence for a while. Then, with a sense of desperation, he expressed his fear of losing me. He acknowledged that things had escalated too far, and he didn't want our family to fall apart. Although he seemed sincere, I knew that true reconciliation wasn't what I wanted, not in the way he hoped. I wasn't interested in returning to how things were or pretending everything could be magically fixed. What I needed was distance, a significant break from the toxic dynamics that had plagued our relationship for so long. I told him I needed to step away from the family, explaining that this meeting was about finding personal closure rather than mending our relationship. In a recent conversation, I made it clear that I wasn't just going to forgive and forget. I emphasized my need for time to heal at my own pace. Surprisingly, he didn't argue or try to persuade me to return. Instead, he simply acknowledged my feelings. This, in its own way, felt like an apology. As I walked away from our meeting, I was enveloped by a complex mix of feelings. I wasn't angry, nor was I completely at ease. I had hoped the meeting might bring some closure, but real closure is seldom as straightforward and clean as we'd like. There was no dramatic resolution, no tearful reconciliations or emotional epiphanies. It was over. I had spoken my piece, and now moving forward was up to me. Since then, I've taken several steps to safeguard my mental well-being. I've distanced myself from more family members who continued to stress me about the ordeal. Elijah and I have been cultivating our life together, away from the incessant family drama. It's refreshing to finally enjoy some space to breathe, although I occasionally feel torn. I know I stood up for myself, which was the right thing to do, but that doesn't always make it easy. There are moments I ponder whether I should have done things differently or given my parents another chance. However, remembering years of feeling inadequate reinforces my conviction that I deserve better. Luna hasn't reached out since the meeting with my father. I think she's still heard about how things unfolded, but I'm no longer interested in mending that relationship. She has shown where her priorities lie, and I've come to terms with the fact that we will never have the close relationship I once imagined. Letting go of that hope has been tough, yet liberating. As for my father, his regret seemed genuine, but I'm unsure if it's sufficient for rebuilding our relationship. For now, I'm focusing on my own well-being and happiness. This ordeal has taught me the importance of putting myself first. So, that's my current stance. It's not the happily ever after I might have wished for, but it's the conclusion I needed. Sometimes, that's all you can ask for. Thank you to everyone who has supported me through this journey. Your support means more to me than words can express.